Hello and welcome back to Management Accounting Applications. This lecture will be on mix and yield, and it will be presented as always by Dr. Martin Roberts. On basic terms, as it says there, is that when we explore variances, we start with the very simple premise of its actual versus budget, and in essence what we're doing is exactly the example that I always use, which is the idea of you create a budget, you create a plan to say go to the cinema. Let's say you plan to spend £20. You come home and you realise that your actual spend was £25. So therefore, in management accounting terms, you are £5 adverse, or just to keep you even more on top of things, if you were doing an overhead absorption rate analysis, you would say that you were underabsorbed. Okay, like I said, is that alright, that's a simple analogy, but what I'm trying to take you along the idea of is that when we start to look at variances in a more complex way, is that we will look at actual versus flex budget. And what we mean by that is that normally each unit will have a standard cost to produce, and therefore you would multiply your actual units sold and produced times by your standard price and standard cost to get a valid comparison. And I think the variances that you can look at, and we've been through certainly in week 1 and also in the pre-week 1 lectures, is there is a lecture on video on all of these variances here. That includes sales, turnover and profit, materials price and usage, labour rate and efficiency, and more importantly, things that we're going to concentrate on for level 5 is the overhead absorption rate. Okay, so the good news is that despite the fact that we are comparing actual versus actual at standard or a flex budget, is that we can break them down even further for even more information gathering and helping management with their thought processes. And so the good news is that we can break our sales, our materials and our labour down into mix and yield. In particular, it's normally focusing on the last of those variances, so profit, usage and efficiency, but not always. Okay, so let's move on. So here we go, is that what do these variances do when we're talking about mix and yield? What we're talking about is the mixing or the proportion in which you sold your units in. Although you might have sold the same quantity of units, if you're selling 2 or 3 different products, as you might have sold the same amount of units, but what might have happened is you've sold them in a different mix. So therefore that can affect anything from your total turnover to your profit margins. So if you had a very high profit margin but you sold lots of low profit margin products, then you would bring that profit down. Now in terms for yield, when we talk about sales, is we're not really getting anywhere in terms of understanding. All that we're talking about there is just looking at potentially if you had different volumes compared to your original budget. Yield comes more into play when you start to look at labour and materials. Okay, so like I said, when we talk about materials, I think this is where mix and yield is very, very good. Is that what it does is it looks at, say, the recipe to make a unit. So in what proportion do you put these amounts of units in? And what happens is that, you know, ideally when you're making something, you have a set amount of material and you use that set amount of material. Now the yield is probably now more easier to explain, is that for materials, is well, if you kept to the recipe, how many final items did you produce? Did you produce less with that recipe, or did you produce more? Okay, and so that's a very, very simple start to mixing yield. There isn't a great deal more to add about it. I think the best thing to do for this particular section is to go and look at the numbers involved, and that's exactly what I'm going to do in lectures 2 and 3 in this series. Okay, take care, and I'll see you soon.